Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Yuna, and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations, as well as the technical requirements for all electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in the European Union. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency device. So today we'll be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunications approval in the European Union. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in most of the European Union. If you have any question on the topics presented today or any other immediate question regarding compliance testing and product certification, you can reach us info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. The CE marking is an indication but not proof of a product's compliance with European Union health, safety, and environmental protection directives and regulations. CE marking on a product indicates to governmental officials that the product may be legally placed on the market in their country. CE marking on a product ensures the free movement of the product within the EFTA and European Union single market, total 30 countries, and the CE Declaration of Conformity is the written statement and the single declaration drawn up by the manufacturer to demonstrate the fulfillment of the EU requirements relating to a product bearing the CE marking he has manufactured it. CE marking on a product permits the withdrawal of the non-conforming products by customs and enforcement authorities. By affixing the CE marking, you will take full responsibility for your product's compliance with the requirement of all the relative directives. And you are also responsible for maintaining the technical documentation, carrying out the testing, and issuing the declaration of conformity as well as the correct labeling of the product. To improve the internal market for goods and strengthen the conditions for placing a wide range of products on the EU market, the new legislative framework was adopted in 2008. It is a package of measurements that aim to improve market surveillance and boost the quality of conformity assessments. It also clarifies the use of CE marking and creates a toolbox of measures for use in product legislation. There are over 20 CE directives, but when we talk about EU market access for electrical products, we're talking about compliance with the essential requirements for these directives. Electrical and electronic engineering industries, also known as EEI. EU policies affecting electrical and electronic engineering industries, EEI, cover three major areas. EMCD covering all equipment that can generate or to be affected by electromagnetic disturbance. RED, it applies to all products using the radio frequency spectrum. LVD covering health and safety risks caused by electrical equipment of specific voltage ranges. As a manufacturer, there are other directives you and your supplier will need to be aware of, such as ROHS Directive, WEEE Directive, Battery Directive. But today we'll cover these three directives in the electrical and electronic engineering industries include electrical devices, radio equipment, and telecommunication industries. Examples are mobile phones, the mobile network infrastructure, TV sets, power supply units, wireless routers, sensors, and much more. Now let's talk about the EMCD overview and background. We'll be covering the overview, conformity assessment, mandatory products and exclusions, technical documentation, CE mark, and surveillance. All electric devices influence each other when interconnected or close to each other, such as interference between TV sets, GSM handsets, radios, and nearby washing machine or electrical power lines. The purpose of EMC is to keep all those side effects under reasonable control. EMC designated all the existing and future techniques and technologies for reducing disturbance and enhancing immunity. The EMC Directive 2030 EU ensures that electrical and electronic equipment does not generate or is not affected by electronic magnetic disturbance. EMCD entered into force on April 18, 2014 and will be applicable as of April 20, 2016. New EMCD will replace the existing EMCD as of April 20, 2016. Directive 2004-108 EC and old EMC Directive 2004-108 EC. EMCD applies to products that were covered by the RNTTE directive but not covered now by the RED. EMCD will no longer apply to the products covered by the RED. Under EMCD, equipment is categorized as apparatus or fixed installation. For apparatus, any finished applicants may be available on the market as a single functional unit intended for the end user and liable to generate electrical magnetic disturbance, or the performance of which is liable to be affected by such a disturbance, such as computer disk drivers, USB memory sticks, or household appliances. Fixed installation is a particular combination of several types of apparatus and where applicable other devices which are assembled, installed, and intended to be used permanently as the predefined location, such as air conditioning installations, lighting installations, power supply networks. The following categories of products are exempt and not included by the EMCD. Equipment without electrical and or electronic parts. Explicitly excluded equipment. Radio equipment. Aeronautical products. Radio equipment intended for use by radio amateurs. Equipment covered by other specific union legislation. Motor vehicle equipment. Medical devices. Marine equipment. Agriculture equipment. Inherently being equipment. It is incapable of generating or contributing to electromagnetic emissions which exceed a level allowing radio and telecommunications equipment and other equipment to operate as intended, and it will operate without unacceptable degradation in the presence of the electrical magnetic disturbance normally presented in its intended environment. Custom-built evaluation kits is used by professionals for the purpose of research and development, such as cables, batteries, corded headphones. The general idea is the manufacturer shall perform an EMC assessment of the apparatus based on the relevant phenomena in order to ensure that he meets the essential requirements. As noted above, the EMCD does not require the mandatory invitation from a third party when carrying out the assessment. The EMCD sets out mandatory essential requirements formulated in a general manner for all equipment within its scope. These essential requirements define the results to be attained, but do not specify the detailed technical requirements. It also allows adapting the equipment and product design as of a technological progress. The appropriate technical solution to meet the 26 requirement are not imposed as long as the equipment complies with the essential requirements. Complying with the applicable harmonized standards give presumption of conformity to the essential requirements of the EMCD, meaning complying with the applicable harmonized means conformity with the essential requirements. Applying several standards may be necessary to address all relevant phenomena in all relevant frequency ranges. For multifunction apparatus, it may also be necessary to select standards relevant to all primary functions. When the manufacturer chooses to apply harmonized harmonized standards, he shall select them in the following precedence order: product-specific standard, product family standards, generic standards. An EMC assessment where no harmonized standards have been applied, usually done where no harmonized standards or where they do not cover all the essential requirements applicable to the apparatus. Technical documentation shall be prepared by the manufacturer to demonstrate evidence of compliance with the essential requirements. The compliance of apparatus with all relevant essential requirements is declared by an EU Declaration of Conformity (DOC) issued by the manufacturer based inside or outside the EU, or his authorized representative in the EU. As the DOC is an official declaration of compliance with the legislation, it must be signed by the manufacturer or his authorized representative. Product specification is required for EMC assessment. The standard for harmonized applied to EN 55032 2012 electrical magnetic compatibility of multimedia equipment, and EN 55024 2010 information technology equipment, immunity, characteristics, limits, and methods of measurement. The testing usually takes about 1 to 2 weeks, and it requires one testing sample. Technical documentation required: product identification and specification, general description of the apparatus, schematics, block diagram, designs, description, or explanation as necessary for the understanding these documents and the operation of the apparatus. Evidence of compliance with harmonized standards, if they have been applied. EU type examination certificate issued by the notified body, an EU Declaration of Conformity. For EU type examination and certification, modifications to the approved type that may affect the conformity of the apparatus with the essential requirements of this directive should be communicated to the MB. The notified body must review the technical design as it pertains to the relevant essential requirements of the EMC directive, and issue an EU type examination certificate to the applicant indicating the aspects of the essential requirements that have been assessed. The compliance of apparatus with all relevant essential requirements is declared by an EU Declaration of Conformity issued by the manufacturer based inside or outside the EU or his authorized representative in the EU. As the DOC is an official declaration of compliance with the legislation, it must be signed by the manufacturer or his authorized representative. By drawing up the EU Declaration of Conformity, the manufacturer shall assume responsibility for the compliance of the apparatus with the requirements laid down in this directive. Object of the declaration: identification of apparatus allowing traceability. It may include a color image of sufficient clarity where necessary for the identification of the apparatus. The CE marking is a key indicator but not proof of a product's compliance with the EU. There are no specific color requirements for the letters and background of the CE mark. In other words, it is not required to print the letter CE in black against a white background. However, the color schemes for the foreground and background should be sufficiently complementary, so that the CE logo is clearly visible, and the vertical dimension will be no less than 5 mm. Products must also be accompanied by additional info, such as contact information, use or installation disclaimers. Now let's talk about the surveillance and penalties. Member states are required to take all appropriate measures to ensure that equipment is placed on the market only if it complies with the requirements of the EMCD. It must maintain the technical document for 10 years. The penalty, determined by member states. Penalties for non-compliance are proportionate to the infringement and may be increased if the relevant economic operator has previously committed similar infringement. Sanctions are imposed by means of fines, whose sums vary from one member state to another. They may also include criminal sanctions for serious infringement. Non-compliant products are subject to corrective measure, bans, withdrawal, or recall. Member states shall lay down rules on penalties applicable to infringement by economic operators of the provisions of national law adopted and shall take all measures necessary to ensure that they are enforced. So this is the end of the Electrical Magnetic Compatibility Directive. And now let's talk about the Radio Equipment Directive, RED. For Radio Equipment Directive, we will be going over the overview, conformity assessment, mandatory products and exclusions, technical documentation, CE mark, and surveillance. RED development started in 2007. The Radio Equipment Directive 2014-53 EU established a regulatory framework for placing radio equipment on the market. It ensures a single market for radio equipment by setting essential requirements for safety and health, electrical magnetic compatibility, and the efficient use of the radio spectrum. It also provides the basis for further regulation covering some additional aspects. These include technical features for the protection of privacy, personal data, and against fraud. Furthermore, additional aspects cover interoperability, access to emergency services, and compliance regarding the combination of radio equipment and software. The RED was published in the OJEU on 22nd May 2004, entered into force on 11th June 2014, and is applicable as of 13 June 2016. It included a one-year transitional period, which ended on 12 June 2017. During the transitional phase, manufacturers were allowed to place on the market radio equipment compliance with either the RED or the EU legislation applicable before 13 June 2016. Pure radio sound and radio TV receive-only equipment, which has been excluded from the RNTTE directive, falls within the scope of the RED. Equipment operating below 9 kHz falls within the scope of the RED, and radio determination equipment is now clearly included within the scope of the RED. The pure wired telecom terminal equipment now falls outside the scope of the RED.
Regulated products. Radio equipment, an electrical or electronic product which intentionally emits radio waves for the purpose of radio communication, receives radio waves for the purpose of radio communication. An electrical or electronic product which must be complete with an accessory such as an antenna so as to intentionally emit radio waves for the purpose of radio communication, receive radio waves for the purpose of radio communication. RF modules, radio frequency modules, as well as components that have an embedded RF module also fits within this definition. Exempt products. The following categories of products are exempt or not regulated by the RED. Radio equipment exclusively used for activities concerning public security, defense, state security, radio equipment used by radio amateurs, marine equipment, airborne equipment, custom-built evaluation kits for the purpose of evaluation, research, or development, specific and explicitly stated cases, antennas, infrared devices, cabling and wiring, or products that are not placed on the market. Conformity assessment. Essential requirements applicable to all radio equipment. The protection of health and safety of persons and of domestic animals. The protection of property, including the objectives with respect to safety requirements set out in the Directive 2014/35/EU, parentheses LVD, parentheses. adequate level of electromagnetic compatibility as set out in the Directive 2014/30/EU, that it both effectively uses and supports the efficient use of radio spectrum in order to avoid harmful interference. Essential requirements are applicable only to certain types of radio equipment pursuant to specific legal acts adopted by the Commission's delegated acts. Currently only applicable to radio equipment supporting access to emergency services, Article 3.3.G. A manufacturer which has the intention to apply a harmonized standard for the conformity assessment of its products has to apply in priority the product-specific harmonized standard, and only if this one is not available, the generic one, in order to benefit of presumption of conformity with the essential requirements of the RED. Annex 2. Manufacturer is required to issue a DOC when the compliance of radio equipment with the applicable requirements of the RED has been demonstrated, and declares it is their sole responsibility through internal production control that the radio equipment concerned satisfies the essential requirements. Annex 3. Conformity to type describes in the EU type examination certification from NB Review, and declares responsibility through internal production control. Annex 4. NB to perform assessment to verify compliance of the quality management system with the requirements. Conformity assessment. For example, for a Bluetooth 2.4 GHz device, the health and safety standards that apply are EN 62479:2010, which covers low-power electronic and electrical equipment, with the base restrictions related to human exposure to electromagnetic fields 10 MHz to 300 GHz, and EN 62368-1:2014, which covers audio and video, information and communications technology equipment, safety requirements. Testing. The lead time is about 1 to 2 weeks and varies depending on how complex the device is, and one test sample is required. Conformity assessment. Electromagnetic compatibility. EMC standard for radio equipment and services. Part 1. Common technical requirements. Harmonized standard covering the essential requirements of Article 3.1b of Directive 2014/53/EU and the essential requirements of Article 6 of Directive 2014/30/EU. Electromagnetic compatibility EMC standard for radio equipment and services. Part 17. Specific conditions for broadband data transmission system, harmonized standard covering the essential requirements of Article 3.1b of Directive 2014/53/EU. Different than the EMCD standards, these are the radio EMC standards. Conformity assessment. Radio. Harmonized standard applied. ITSI EN 300-328, version 2.1.1. Wideband transmission systems. Data transmission equipment operating in the 2.4 GHz ISM band and using wideband modulation techniques. Harmonized standards covering the essential requirements of Article 3.2 of Directive 2014/53/EU. Testing. Lead time 1 to 2 weeks. Varies depending on how complex your device is. And one test sample required. 4G cellular devices and base stations can take up to 4 to 6 weeks. Here's an overview of the technical documentation. Products, general description, internal and external photos, software and firmware affecting compliances, user information, installation instructions, EU Type Examination Certificate issued by the notified body. EU Declaration of Conformity, DOC. Declaration of radio equipment has been constructed so that it can operate in at least one member state. Labeling, CE marking on product or packaging if not feasible to be on the product. Identification number by type, batch, or serial, corresponding to DOC. Some side notes about the technical documentation for the conformity assessment procedures. A copy of the DOC or a simplified declaration of conformity has to accompany each radio equipment. Manufacturers shall ensure that the radio equipment shall be so constructed that it can be operated in at least one member state or Switzerland without infringing applicable requirements on the use of the radio spectrum. Minimum height of 5 millimeters. Additional info is needed, such as instructions and safety information in the language of the member state. Annex 2. Manufacturer is required to issue a DOC when the compliance of radio equipment with the applicable requirements of the RED has been demonstrated, and declares it is their sole responsibility through internal production control that the radio equipment concerns satisfies the essential requirements. Annex 3. Conformity to type described in the EU Type Examination Certificate from NB Review and declares responsibility through internal production control. Surveillance. Member states are required to take all appropriate measures to ensure that equipment is placed on the market only if it complies with the requirements of the RED. Must maintain the technical documentation for 10 years. Penalties determined by member states. Penalties for noncompliance are proportionate to the infringement and may be increased if the relevant economic operator has previously committed similar infringements. Sanctions are imposed by means of fines whose sums vary from one member state to another. They may also include criminal sanctions for serious infringement. Non-compliance products are subject to corrective measures, bans, withdrawals, or recalls. Member states shall lay down rules on penalties applicable to infringements by economic operators of the provisions of national laws adopted and shall take all measures necessary to ensure that they are enforced. Now let's go over what we have reviewed so far. The Electrocompatibility Directive, EMCD, and Radio Equipment Directive, RED. Lastly, there is Low Voltage Directive, LVD. The Low Voltage Directive, LVD, 2014/35/EU ensures that electrical equipment within certain voltage limits provides a high level of protection for European citizens and benefits fully from the single market. It has been applicable since the 20th of April 2016. The LVD covers health and safety risks on electrical equipment operating with an input and output voltage of between 50 to 1,000 volts for alternating currents and 75 to 1,500 volts for direct current. It applies to wide ranges of electrical equipment for both customer and professional usage, such as household appliances, cables, power supply units, laser equipment, certain components, for example, fuses. Here is the LVD overview: the mandatory products and exclusions, conformity assessments, technical documentation, CE mark, and surveillance. EMCD entered into force on the 18th of April 2018 and was applicable until the 20th of April 2016. A new EMCD replaced the existing EMCD Directive 2004/108/EC on the 20th of April 2016. EMCD applies to products that were covered by the RNTTE directive, but not covered now by the RED telecommunications terminal equipment. EMCD no longer applies to products covered by the RED. Regulated products. Electrical equipment. The LVD applies to all electrical equipment designed for use within a voltage rating 50 to 1000 volts for alternating currents, VAC, 75 to 1500 volts for direct current, VDC. Voltage rating refers to a voltage of the electrical input and output, not to voltages that may appear inside the equipment. LVD includes both electrical equipment intended for incorporation into other equipment and equipment intended to be used directly without incorporating. Meaning components are also regulated under LVD. LVD covers consumer goods such as electronic appliances, lighting equipment, electric motors and alternators, electric wiring, appliance couplers and cord sets, electrical installation equipment, cable management systems, and etc. Exempt products. The following categories of products are exempt or not regulated by the LVD. Electrical equipment for use in an explosive environment, electrical equipment for radiology or medical purposes, electrical parts for goods and passenger lifts, electric meters, plugs and socket outlets for domestic use, electric fence controllers, radioelectric interference, specialized electrical equipment for use on ships, aircrafts, or railways, which complies with the safety provisions drawn up by the international bodies in which the member states participate, custom-built evaluation kits destined for professionals to be used solely at research and development facilities for such purposes. Conformity assessment, internal production control. The product and quality system assessment procedure is carried out by the manufacturer through its own internal production control. Obligations of the manufacturer, technical documentation, declaration of conformity, CE marking. There is no conformity assessment procedure in the LVD, which requires the intervention of a notified body. Low Voltage Directive, Harmonized Standards Applied, EN 62368-1:2014, covers audio, video, information, and communication technology equipment, replacing EN 6095 0-1:2008 and EN 665:2014. The new approach in IEC 62368 focuses on demonstrating consideration on known hazards and that the product is designed to be safely operated in that context, as opposed to IEC 6950 and IEC 665, where the emphasis is on whether the prescribed specifications have been met, though hazard-based 62368-3 does not require risk analysis like IEC 6601-1. Testing lead time is about 1 to 2 weeks and requires one test sample. Technical documentation and general descriptions of the electrical equipment, conceptual designs in the manufacturing designs and schemes of components, subassemblies, circuits, etc. Descriptions and explanations necessary for the understanding of those drawings and schemes and the operation of the equipment. Results of design calculations made, examinations carried out, list of harmonized standards applied, test reports, declaration of conformity, labeling. The manufacturer shall affix the CE marking to each individual electrical equipment that satisfies the applicable requirements of the LVD. The manufacturer shall draw up a written EU declaration of conformity for a product model and keep it together with the technical documentation at the disposal of the National Market Surveillance Authorities for 10 years after the electrical equipment has been placed on the market. The EU Declaration of Conformity shall identify the electrical equipment for which it has been drawn up. A copy of the EU Declaration of Conformity shall be made available to the relevant market surveillance authorities upon request. Surveillance. If there is sufficient reason to believe the electrical equipment presents a risk to the health and safety of persons or domestic animals or to property, authorities shall carry out an evaluation covering LVD requirements. The LVD requires that the manufacturer and others in the supply chain present documents to the market surveillance authorities in the local language of the market state concerned, must maintain the technical documentation for 10 years. Penalties. If found to be non-compliant, appropriate corrective actions commensurate with the nature of the risk may be prescribed. Bring the electrical equipment into compliance, withdrawn from the market, recall it within a reasonable period, commensurate with the nature of the risk as they may prescribe. Member states shall lay down rules on penalties applicable to infringement by economic operators of the provisions of national law adopted and shall take all measures necessary to ensure that they are enforced. The LVD requires that the manufacturer and others in the supply chain present documentation in the language easily understood by market surveillance authorities of the member state concerned, which means the local language. As an overview, the Low Voltage Directive LVD 2014/35/EU ensures that electrical equipment within certain voltage limits provides a high level of protection for European citizens and benefits fully from the single market. It has been applicable since the 20th of April 2016. The LVD covers health and safety risk on electrical equipment operating with an input and output voltage of between 50 and 1000 voltage for alternating currents, 75 to 1500 volts for direct current. It applies to a wide range of electrical equipment for both consumer and professional usage, such as household appliances, cables, power supply units, laser equipment, and certain components, including fuses.